What really happened when 24-year-old Elvis Presley met 14-year-old Priscilla Beaulieu in Germany in 1959? For decades, this question has haunted Elvis fans, biographers, and critics alike. The official story sounds almost fairy tale-like. A lonely soldier, grieving his mother's death, finds emotional solace in a mature-for-her-age teenager who becomes his confidante. Priscilla herself has insisted, "There was no sex at first. Elvis respected my age." She's described their early relationship as something pure, built on late-night conversations about loss, fear, and dreams. Elvis would pour his heart out to her. She'd listen, and somehow this 14-year-old girl became the emotional anchor for the world's biggest star. But here's what doesn't add up. Why would a 24-year-old man surrounded by beautiful women, groupies, and Hollywood starlets choose to pursue a relationship with a high school freshman? What was he really looking for? And perhaps most disturbingly, if their connection was so innocent, why did Priscilla's family initially oppose it? What did they see that made them hesitate before eventually giving permission? The answers reveal a relationship far more complex and controversial than either Elvis or Priscilla ever publicly admitted. Before we dive deeper into this story, please subscribe to support our channel as we continue uncovering the untold truths behind music's greatest legends. September 13, 1959. Bad Nauheim, Germany. Captain Paul Beaulieu's stepdaughter Priscilla was like most 14-year-old girls navigating high school, dealing with adolescent awkwardness, trying to fit in at yet another military base. That evening, she attended a party at another Air Force family's home. It was supposed to be innocent, teenagers playing records, dancing, military personnel swapping stories. But word had spread that Elvis Presley might show up. The king of rock and roll was serving his mandatory military service in Germany, though he mostly kept to himself in his rented house on Goethestrasse. Most assumed it was just rumor, but Elvis did show up. And when Priscilla walked into that room, something in Elvis's expression changed. Witnesses reported that Elvis, who'd been casually chatting with soldiers, suddenly became focused on this teenage girl with dark hair and striking features. She looked mature for her age with careful makeup and sophisticated bearing. But she was still unmistakably young, still carrying adolescent uncertainty. Elvis approached her directly. "Hi, I'm Elvis Presley," he said, as if she wouldn't recognize him. Priscilla recalled being stunned into near silence, managing only basic responses. He asked about her family, school, adjusting to Germany. The conversation should have been brief, a celebrity being polite before moving on. Instead, Elvis kept talking to her, for hours, while other partygoers watched in disbelief. The most famous entertainer in the world sat engaged in deep conversation with a 14-year-old girl he'd just met. What was really happening in those first hours? According to Priscilla's accounts, Elvis wasn't hitting on her conventionally. He was pouring out his soul about something that had devastated him just over a year earlier. His mother Gladys's death in August 1958. Elvis had been extraordinarily close to his mother, almost pathologically so. When she died suddenly of heart failure at age 46, Elvis was serving his first Army weeks. Friends reported that Elvis threw himself on her coffin at the funeral, sobbing uncontrollably, crying out "Mama, Mama" in front of hundreds. In the year since, Elvis had been carrying this grief like an open wound, finding no one who could help him process it. But Priscilla was different. She was young enough to be unthreatening, old enough to understand loss. Her biological father had died when she was young. She didn't want anything from Elvis except to listen. And Elvis, starved for genuine emotional connection, found himself unable to stop talking to her. He told her about the guilt he carried, becoming so famous, making so much money, buying his mother everything, yet she still died. He told her about loneliness of fame, how everyone wanted something from him. He told her about his fears of returning to America, worried his career would be over. For a 14-year-old girl, this must have been intoxicating. Here was Elvis Presley, treating her not like a child but like a trusted friend, sharing secrets the world would never hear. The power dynamic couldn't have been more skewed, but neither seemed to recognize it, or perhaps Elvis recognized it all too well. When Priscilla came home that night, She was floating. She told her parents she'd met Elvis, that they'd talked for hours, that he'd asked for her number. Captain Beaulieu's reaction was immediate and negative. His 14-year-old stepdaughter was not getting involved with a 24-year-old rock star. Elvis's fame made it worse. The Beaulieus had heard stories about his reputation with women. The groupies, wild parties. They'd seen him on television gyrating in ways that scandalized conservative America. The Ed Sullivan Show filmed him from the waist up to avoid showing his hip movements. This was not the kind of man who should be near their teenage daughter. But Elvis was persistent. He called the Beaulieu house the next day, and the day after. He sent polite messages through military channels, using his celebrity carefully. He assured Captain Beaulieu his intentions were honorable, that he simply enjoyed Priscilla's company, that he'd never do anything inappropriate. He invited the entire Beaulieu family to dinner at his house, playing the perfect gentleman, calling Mrs. Beaulieu ma'am, discussing military service respectfully with the captain, showing he was just a southern boy far from home who missed his own family. This is where the story gets complicated. Elvis's campaign to win over Priscilla's parents worked. Gradually, despite initial resistance, the Beaulieu began allowing their 14-year-old daughter to spend time with this 24-year-old man. Elvis would send his car to pick up Priscilla and bring her to his house, where they'd spend evenings talking, listening to music, sometimes with others present, sometimes alone. Priscilla maintains nothing sexual happened during this Germany period. Elvis respected that I was only 14, she stated repeatedly. He never pushed me into anything physical. It was all about talking, about connection. But the question remains, what kind of 24-year-old man needs emotional connection from a 14-year-old girl so badly that he'll work for weeks to overcome her parents' objections? The answer was a man emotionally stuck at the age he'd lost his mother. Elvis's relationship with Gladys had been intense to the point of unhealthy. When Gladys died, Elvis was 23 but emotionally still a child seeking maternal approval. In Priscilla, just entering adolescence, Elvis found someone young enough to be molded, innocent enough to seem pure, but old enough to provide emotional support he desperately needed. In March 1960, Elvis's military service ended. He returned to the United States to restart his career. By all logic, this should have ended their relationship, but Elvis didn't let go. He called Priscilla constantly, sometimes multiple times daily. The Beaulieu phone bill became astronomical. He wrote long, detailed letters that kept Priscilla emotionally tethered across thousands of miles. He sent gifts, records, jewelry, clothing in the style he'd taught her to wear. He made promises about bringing her to America when she was old enough. And most importantly, he made sure she stayed faithful to him. Elvis questioned Priscilla about every aspect of her life, who she spent time with, whether boys at school were interested, what she did every evening. For a 14-year-old girl, then 15, then 16, this attention from Elvis Presley was overwhelming. How could any high school boy compete? Priscilla's teenage years became entirely defined by waiting for Elvis. While classmates went to dances and dated, Priscilla spent evenings by the phone or writing letters to Memphis. Her entire identity became wrapped up in being Elvis's girl, though almost no one at school believed her. Elvis maintained this long-distance relationship with meticulous care, never letting Priscilla drift away. According to later accounts, Elvis would sometimes go weeks without calling, leaving her desperate and anxious, then suddenly flood her with attention again. A classic pattern of intermittent reinforcement that psychologists recognize as a powerful tool for creating emotional dependency. Elvis was, whether consciously or not, grooming Priscilla, not in the immediate sexual sense but emotionally and psychologically. He was shaping this teenager into someone who would dedicate her entire existence to being what he needed. In 1962, when Priscilla was 17, Elvis made an outrageous proposition. He wanted her to come live with him in Memphis. Not to get married. Elvis was clear he wasn't ready for marriage. But to live at Graceland, finish high school there, be near him. The Beaulieus said no immediately. But Elvis made promises. Priscilla would live with his father, Vernon, and stepmother Dee at their house near Graceland, not with Elvis himself. She'd attend private Catholic school. Vernon would act as guardian. Everything would be proper. And somehow, incredibly, the Beaulieu agreed. In 1963, at age 17, Priscilla Beaulieu moved to Memphis. The public story was that Priscilla lived with Vernon and attended school normally. The reality was different. Priscilla spent almost every night at Graceland, in Elvis's bedroom, finally entering the physical relationship Elvis had supposedly been holding back. She was 17, he was 27, and suddenly all the respect for her youth seemed to evaporate. But the physical relationship was only part of the transformation Elvis was engineering. He continued the process started in Germany, molding Priscilla into his ideal woman. He controlled every aspect of her appearance. Her hair had to be dyed jet black, like his. Her makeup had to be heavy and dramatic. Thick black eyeliner, pale foundation, dark red lips. Her clothing had to be provocative but classy. She had to be available whenever he wanted her, but couldn't be clingy. She had to be sophisticated enough to impress his Hollywood friends but innocent enough to remain unspoiled. She had to be, in essence, a living doll that he could control completely. Priscilla later described this period with strange mixture of nostalgia and recognition of how unhealthy it was. She felt special, chosen by Elvis out of all women. But she was losing any sense of who she actually was apart from being Elvis's girlfriend. She couldn't have close friends Elvis didn't approve of. She couldn't go anywhere without permission. Her entire existence revolved around being ready when Elvis wanted her, which was unpredictable. By 1966, Priscilla had been living this strange half-life for 3 years. She was 21, had given up any chance at normal young adulthood, and had nothing to show for it except being Elvis's girlfriend, a title that came with no legal rights, no financial security, no guarantee Elvis wouldn't move on. She'd watched Elvis conduct affairs, seen him disappear for months to Hollywood, endured humiliation of gossip columns speculating about which actress captured his attention. She finally reached a breaking point. Priscilla gave Elvis an ultimatum: marry her or she was leaving. For Elvis, this should have been simple. He'd pursued this relationship for 7 years, starting when Priscilla was 14. He'd convinced her parents to let her move across the world. He'd shaped her into exactly the woman he wanted. But Elvis didn't want to get married. Marriage meant commitment, responsibility, losing access to other women. So Elvis stalled. He made promises about getting married soon. Months passed with no progress. Priscilla began making plans to leave Memphis, and that's when Elvis panicked. The idea of losing Priscilla, losing control over her, was unbearable. In late 1966, Elvis suddenly announced they were getting married. No romantic proposal, no discussion of their future, just a declaration that they'd marry in May 1967. The wedding, held at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas on May 1, 1967, was rushed and strange. Elvis seemed almost dissociated during the ceremony. The guest list was tiny. Many of Elvis's close friends weren't even invited. The entire event felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. 9 months after the wedding, Lisa Marie Presley was born on February 1, 1968. Elvis was ecstatic about having a daughter, but becoming a father didn't make him a more present husband. If anything, Elvis became more distant after Lisa Marie's birth. He'd gotten what he wanted: a wife who looked perfect, a daughter who adored him, a family that existed at Graceland waiting for him whenever he wanted to come home. But he didn't want the day-to-day reality of marriage and parenthood. In 1972, Priscilla began an affair with her karate instructor, Mike Stone. It was the first time she'd made a choice purely for herself, the first time she'd done something Elvis hadn't approved or controlled. When Elvis found out, he was devastated and enraged. Not because he loved Priscilla so deeply, but because she'd broken the rules. She was his. He'd chosen her, shaped her, made her what she was. For Elvis, this was unthinkable betrayal. But that was exactly the problem. Elvis had given Priscilla everything except the one thing she actually needed: the freedom to be her own person. In February 1972, Priscilla left Graceland with Lisa Marie. In October 1973, the divorce was finalized. At 28 years old, Priscilla was starting the process of figuring out who she actually was, separate from Elvis. Elvis, meanwhile, spiraled further into prescription drug addiction. In the 4 years between the divorce and his death in August 1977, Elvis's deterioration accelerated dramatically. But here's what makes the Elvis-Priscilla story so complicated, even decades later. Priscilla herself has never described her relationship with Elvis as abusive or predatory. Despite all the obvious red flags, she's consistently portrayed their relationship as a love story, unconventional, but ultimately about two people who cared deeply for each other. She's defended the age gap, defended Elvis's behavior, defended the relationship that consumed her entire adolescence. When people point out that a 24-year-old pursuing a 14-year-old is inherently problematic, Priscilla pushes back, insisting people don't understand how mature she was, how respectful Elvis was. But is that actually true? Or is that what someone would say if they'd spent their entire formative years being shaped by someone who needed them to believe the relationship was special and pure? Priscilla's entire identity, her entire public image, her entire career after Elvis has been built on being Elvis's wife and later Elvis's ex-wife. How can someone fully critique a relationship that defines their entire existence? In recent years, as society's understanding of power dynamics, consent, and appropriate relationships has evolved, the Elvis-Priscilla story has come under increased scrutiny. The 2023 film, based on Priscilla's autobiography, couldn't avoid the uncomfortable realities. The movie shows 14-year-old Priscilla meeting 24-year-old Elvis, shows her gradually being isolated and controlled, shows the toll it took on her mental health. Even though the film is sympathetic to both, viewers couldn't help but see what it was showing: a teenager being groomed by a much older, much more powerful man. Some defenders of Elvis point out that relationships with significant age gaps were more common in the 1950s and 1960s. But even by the standards of 1959, a 24-year-old pursuing a 14-year-old was questionable enough that Priscilla's parents initially said no. Elvis had to work hard to convince them, make promises and assurances. He knew on some level that what he was doing was pushing boundaries. And yet he did it anyway, because he wanted what he wanted, and he had the power and charm to make it happen. The question that remains, more than 60 years after that first meeting in Bad Nauheim, is whether it's possible to acknowledge both the genuine connection that Elvis and Priscilla shared and the inherent problems with their relationship. Can we recognize that Priscilla seems to have sincerely loved Elvis while also acknowledging that a 14-year-old cannot truly consent to a relationship with a 24-year-old, regardless of how mature she seems? Can we appreciate Elvis's musical genius while also being honest about his problematic behavior toward young women? Can we listen to Priscilla's own narrative while also recognizing that someone who entered a controlling relationship as a teenager might not have the perspective to fully understand what was done to them? These are uncomfortable questions without easy answers, but they're questions worth asking, because the Elvis-Priscilla story continues to influence how we think about celebrity, power, age gaps in relationships, and what we're willing to excuse when someone is famous enough. In the end, the story of 14-year-old Priscilla meeting 24-year-old Elvis is not the fairy tale romance it's often been presented as. It's a complex, troubling story about power, control, and what happens when an extremely famous, extremely damaged man decides that a teenage girl is exactly what he needs to fill the void left by his dead mother. It's a story about parents who should have said no and stuck to it, but who were ultimately worn down by Elvis's persistence and charisma. It's a story about a girl who gave up her entire adolescence and young adulthood to become what someone else wanted her to be. The question we need to ask now is, are we still willing to look away, or are we finally ready to see the Elvis-Priscilla relationship for what it actually was? Not a love story, but a cautionary tale about what happens when power and fame remove all normal boundaries. The night of September 13, 1959 changed Priscilla Beaulieu's life forever. What we can say with certainty is this: a 14-year-old girl should never have been put in that position, and a 24-year-old man, no matter how famous or charming or emotionally damaged, should have known better. That's the truth that lies behind all the romance and nostalgia and carefully maintained legacy.